I love the contrast between sort of, what Vice is doing with the news and kind of the legacy of, big media and time and what it is. Tell me about your editorial challenges, because I suspect it's hard just to forget the brands,
right.
Get your editorial team to feel warm and comfortable about brands being at the table.
It's interesting because so on the publishing side and the advertising side, and I think everyone's saying this in the press, well, they sit together now. I mean, they don't physically sit together, but there's more of a shared mentality that the two can function in a way that's meaningful, that we can come up with a product in which there's no longer that separation, the wall that separates. There's more of a little bit of a collaboration that's going on. It's not full-fledged yet, but it's the start of that collaboration, so that the editorial director can sit down with the advertising team, never happened before, and say, here's our schedule coming up. Here are the things we're going to do, and then the advertising team can look at that and say, what are ways that we could plug in to what's happening editorially that's meaningful? And I think that gets to the point of, for an advertiser, ideally, I mean, I've worked in publishing. I worked at Esquire magazine as an editor and writer years ago. That ideally, what they want to buy is the equity in the brand, and a lot of that equity is integrity. You guys were talking about integrity before, and to some degree, they don't want that wall to come down. I mean, you always hear this like, well, we want to be able to do this and be able, you think that the best thing to do is to go to an advertiser and say, what do you want to do? Like, how can we make it super custom for you?
But when you peel back the onion, because this is sort of, my experience working with publisher clients, like when you peel back the layers of the onion, okay, yeah, there is editorial and journalistic integrity. I get that, and that should not be compromised.
Right.
But there's also sort of this hidden fear of like, well, watching video is easier, it's more sexy, it's sight, sound, and motion, so they're going to read less lines and they're going to watch more video. I mean, how do you address that innate fear of it cannibalizing time spent, consuming the content?
I think more and more we're looking at it as the content, and it is a company-wide priority. Video is, we just put in a huge live studio, so video is one of the things that we are really focused on as the storytelling element. So the Freedom Tower is a great example. We put a gigapan up on the top of the Freedom Tower. This amazing editor that climbed, he was one of 2 people that had ever been to the top, the very top, like, I don't know what you would call that, the top of the scaffolding, whatever it is. And they put a camera arm out, and it took a 180-degree picture across the city in every outlying borough. And you could actually take that image and move it around and see like your apartment, in Brooklyn or wherever it is.
Right.
And then attached to that was a documentary film, Red Border Films, a 10-minute documentary that we produced for that. Then attached to that is a whole story. Then attached to that is the magazine. So when we can create that, and I'm loath to use the term cross-media experience, but when we can create an experience...
It's better than transmedia.
Thank you, yeah, I would agree. But when we can create that kind of experience that has to be thought of from the ground up by the various platforms that it's being told on, and mobile, then I think we're starting to overcome that initial fear of like, are we going to cannibalize what we're doing with the magazine? Are we going to cannibalize with what we're doing with editorial in term of text and written word,
But okay, so that's great, because that's a tangible example. Let's talk through that. So that is an incredible cross-platform idea, right, from a storytelling perspective. And you can illuminate that story in such meaningful ways by platform.
Right.
How do you now bring a brand into that fold? What's that process look like? And I know part of this is just like I'm left brain, right? I mean, the whole how we do business and how we work and how it's changing. To me, that's why I keep asking a lot of the questions I do, because like operationally, the workflow, the talent mapping, how people function, how they work together, all of that is radically changing, and that to me is the bigger disruption rather than it's harder to buy, right?
Well, and I think that it's great. Actually, the salesperson who sold the package is sitting in the room today. And what's interesting about that in particular is, we get millions of RFPs every day, and part of it is, how do you decide what you should respond to in a meaningful way, and what are you just responding to because you're just responding? And this is a great example of where the salesperson really knew what we were going after and how we were going to do it. The key part of the whole experience was not to turn back and think about what happened previously with the towers coming down, but to look forward and think about the iron workers, many of whom in the documentary, many of them are the children of the original iron workers who put up the towers. And Advil was a perfect sponsor. And the reason why is because these people are in pain every day from working on the towers.
Right.
And it's a great story about the family values and so forth going forward. And along with it, a lot of the pain that goes with producing that kind of physical.
Yeah. And I mean, by the way, Time overall as an overarching brand, there's a lot of authenticity there as well, right? And I think that was sort of what we heard from Ben is like, well, you have Vice as a parent media company, and then you have the Vice properties, but there's a connective tissue that runs throughout that, right? And you guys sort of have a lot of that as well, and that's a lot of moving parts, right? It's hard to balance, and again, that's a lot for a brand to get its head around and to make them feel safe and comfortable. I mean, how much is going back to the thematic, I think that's something I'm going to attach to today, like this idea of taking risks. Are you asking brands to take risks a lot when it comes to branded content or sponsored content with you guys?
It's interesting, I think on two levels. One is the idea, you and I think we had discussed this at some point. Mark Andreessen had written something about the fact that legacy companies should just let go of their legacy. So, in this case, Time should let go of the magazine and just move into digital, purely digital, and get rid of what's a pretty sizable business. So I'm not sure that makes the most sense. But that said, it's an interesting mindset to start thinking about how you produce primarily for digital, and how does that convey your story going forward?
Yes, but I think that's also, I think we in media think we have the hubris to assume that we have unique business problems and other industries haven't had them as well, right? And I would suggest that like we're in the middle of a revolution, an industrial revolution if you liken it to other industries, right? And so, data automation, all that stuff's kind of coming in. And how is that, how are you getting your editorial staff comfortable with, because it goes back to the fact that storytelling is good storytelling, right? Like when I briefly worked for Ridley Scott, and we went into the YouTube team and we showed them the Apple commercial that by this time was in SD and pixelated and old, it was still one hell of a piece of creative, right? So editorial integrity is timeless. How do you marry that to the dynamic and fluid changing environment of monetization around it?
And it's a great question, a very difficult thing to solve for. And I think what you're looking at is a number of different things. One is the scale of investment. If we take Red Border Films, that's looking at a different scale for an advertiser to invest in, and a different kind of faith. Or what kind of films are you going to produce? Because only up to a certain degree can you talk about that we're going to have access to Bono or whomever to do that. And, often we have to speak in those terms of people like Bono, or whatever that story would be about. So there's a leap of faith that happens with advertisers financially. But then in that, breaking down that wall, and how do they feel like they can get their brand integrated into the experience that we're creating, a lot of that can also be platform, right? So we have a live show called The Brief. It's the 4 most important stories of the day, right? And as part of that, we propose that we have an advertiser we're working with right now to create a 5th segment. So it becomes a part of the platform and the way that show actually works. And that segment is about business. So it feels and actually integrates in a way that's meaningful. And I think it's been brought up a number of times. It adds value to the brand, credibility to the brand, because they're bringing something credible to the consumer that's of value to them.
And it's the voice of the audience, right?
Exactly.
As what Ben said,
That's
right?
the goal, yeah.
Awesome.